The Xyloxian Central Medical Facility on the planet Charon 9 was dying. Not metaphorically, literally dying. Its gleaming corridors, once a beacon of hope for thousands of alien species, now echoed with the sound of failing equipment and desperate whispers. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the facility's massive entrance, his dark brown skin contrasting sharply with the pale blue metallic walls. His medical bag, a compact quantum adaptive kit that looked more like a sophisticated piece of technology than a traditional medical case, hung at his side. The recruitment had been sudden, almost desperate. An emergency interstellar medical exchange program that most deemed impossible. The facility's chief administrator, a towering Xyloxian named Krelvax, approached with a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed desperation. His 4 eyes, 2 primary and 2 peripheral, scanned Marcus with an intensity that would have unnerved a less experienced physician. "You are the human doctor." Krelvax's translator implant converted his complex throat vibrations into crisp, somewhat mechanical standard galactic. Marcus nodded, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, xenomedicine specialist from Earth's Interstellar Medical Corps. The facility was a monument to failing technology. Medical pods flickered with inconsistent energy signatures. Diagnostic screens displayed scrambled data that seemed to change before one could comprehend it. Patients of various species, some humanoid, some so alien they defied easy description, lay in various states of medical distress. "We have lost 3 senior xenobiological researchers in the past solar cycle," Krelvax explained, his voice a mixture of professional detachment and underlying grief. "Our medical protocols are breaking down. Species-specific treatments that worked for centuries are now causing unexpected complications." Marcus listened intently, his mind already processing the preliminary information. The medical bag at his side was no ordinary medical kit. Developed by Earth's most advanced medical research teams, it contained adaptive nanodiagnostic tools capable of analyzing multiple biological systems simultaneously. As they walked through the facility, Marcus observed the intricate medical challenges. A crystalline being in one chamber seemed to be fragmenting at its molecular structure. Another patient, a gaseous life form contained in a specialized chamber, pulsed with erratic energy patterns that suggested critical systemic failure. "How long has this been happening?" Marcus asked, his tone professional but not detached. Krelvax's peripheral eyes dimmed, a gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep concern among his species. "Approximately 3 standard galactic cycles. Our best researchers have been unable to determine the root cause." The human doctor's eyes narrowed. This was more than a simple medical crisis. Something fundamental was breaking down in their understanding of interspecies medical treatment. As they reached the central diagnostic chamber, Marcus began unpacking his medical kit. Microdrones emerged, scanning the environment with precision that made the facility's existing equipment look primitive. Holographic data streams erupted around him, creating a 3-dimensional map of the facility's medical challenges. Krelvax watched, simultaneously impressed and terrified. Humans were known for their adaptability, but this level of medical technology was unprecedented. "I'll need complete access to your medical archives," Marcus stated. It wasn't a request. "And I'll need to understand the specific evolutionary pathways of each species currently under treatment." The Xyloxian administrator hesitated. Medical archives were considered the most sacred and protected information in their culture. Sharing them completely was almost unheard of. But they were out of options. "Granted," Krelvax finally responded, his translator adding a subtle undertone of both hope and resignation. As the first of Marcus's diagnostic drones began their intricate dance of medical investigation, something shifted in the facility. It was subtle, a change in atmospheric pressure, a slight recalibration of hope. The human doctor had arrived. And nothing would be the same again. The medical archives of the Xyloxian Central Medical Facility were a labyrinth of complexity. Stored in quantum-encrypted data cores that predated human civilization, they represented millennia of medical knowledge from countless species. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez spent the first 72 hours in virtual isolation, his specialized interface allowing him to dive deep into layers of medical information that would have driven most researchers to madness. Krelvax watched with growing unease. The human doctor moved between holographic displays, his fingers dancing across quantum interfaces, creating and dissolving complex medical models faster than the facility's chief administrators could comprehend. "You're finding something," Krelvax stated more than asked, his 4 eyes tracking Marcus's intense concentration. Marcus looked up, a holographic representation of a multicellular organism rotating between them. "Not just something. A fundamental flaw in your entire approach to cross-species medical treatment." The medical research team, a diverse group of alien specialists who had spent decades studying interspecies healthcare, gathered around. Their skepticism was palpable, a thick atmosphere of professional doubt that Marcus had encountered countless times before. Dr. Lyronox, a crystalline being whose body constantly shifted between solid and semi-liquid states, spoke first. "We have documented procedures spanning thousands of your Earth years. What could you possibly see that we have missed?" Marcus manipulated the hologram, revealing intricate biological pathways that began to pulse with different colors. "Your medical approach treats each species as a completely isolated system. But biological systems are interconnected. What you're seeing as individual medical failures are actually symptoms of a much larger systemic issue." He zoomed in on a microscopic level, showing how different species' cellular structures were experiencing progressive degradation. It wasn't random, there was a pattern, subtle but unmistakable. "Your medical archives show a gradual shift in cellular communication protocols across multiple species," Marcus explained. "It's like a cascading communication breakdown at the molecular level." The research team exchanged looks of confusion and growing interest. Krelvax moved closer, his peripheral eyes focusing intently on the display. "For centuries, you've been treating symptoms," Marcus continued. "But the real problem is how different species' biological systems communicate and adapt. Your medical technologies have become so specialized that they've lost the ability to recognize broader systemic changes." Dr. Lyronox's crystalline form flickered, a sign of deep contemplation. "We have over 10,000 documented medical protocols. Are you suggesting they're all fundamentally flawed?" Marcus smiled, not a dismissive smile, but one of scientific excitement. "Not flawed. Just incomplete. Humanity's greatest medical breakthroughs came when we started looking at biological systems as interconnected networks rather than isolated entities." He began demonstrating a new diagnostic approach. His quantum-adaptive medical drones began recalibrating, creating complex interactive models that showed how cellular communication could be re-established across different species. The first breakthrough came with the crystalline patient Marcus had observed during his initial tour. Where previous treatments had focused on stabilizing the patient's molecular structure, Marcus's approach addressed the underlying communication disruption. Within hours, the patient showed remarkable improvement. The crystalline being's fragmentation stopped, its molecular structure beginning to realign in ways that seemed impossible just days before. "This is impossible," muttered one of the senior researchers. "No," Marcus corrected. "This is just a different approach to understanding life." Krelvax approached Marcus, his 4 eyes showing a mix of emotions, hope, skepticism, and a growing respect. "You realize what you're suggesting challenges thousands of years of medical understanding? Scientific progress has always been about challenging existing understanding," Marcus responded. "And right now, your entire medical system is dying. We don't have the luxury of maintaining outdated perspectives." As word spread through the facility, something began to change. The atmosphere of defeat started to lift. Patients who had been considered beyond help began showing signs of stabilization. The quantum adaptive approach was working in ways no one had anticipated. The human doctor had done more than just arrive at a struggling medical facility. He was rewriting the fundamental understanding of interspecies medical treatment. And this was just the beginning. The medical research wing of the Xyloxian Central Facility transformed overnight. What had been a stagnant, almost hopeless environment now hummed with an energy of possibility. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the center of a whirlwind of scientific innovation, his human perspective challenging every established medical protocol. Dr. Lyra Knox, once the most skeptical of the research team, now worked alongside Marcus with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. The crystalline researcher had become his closest ally, her molecular structure shifting with excitement as they developed new cross-species medical technologies. The key, Marcus explained during a critical research session, is adaptive communication. Not just between individual cells, but between entire biological systems. He demonstrated using a holographic model that showed how different species' cellular structures could be encouraged to communicate more effectively. It was like watching a complex dance of biological information, with each species' unique characteristics finding harmony instead of conflict. The first major breakthrough came with a patient that had previously been considered untreatable, a gaseous life form from the methane clouds of Epsilon 9. Traditional treatments had always focused on containing and stabilizing the patient, treating their unique biology as a problem to be managed rather than a system to be understood. Marcus's approach was radically different. Instead of trying to force the gaseous being into a fixed state, he developed a dynamic containment field that allowed for natural molecular fluctuations while providing targeted molecular guidance. "We're not controlling the patient," he explained to the stunned research team. "We're creating an environment that allows their natural healing processes to work more effectively." The results were nothing short of miraculous. The gaseous patient, who had been in a state of critical instability for solar cycles, began to show signs of regeneration. Its molecular structure stabilized, then began to demonstrate levels of healing that were unprecedented. Krelvax watched the developments with a mixture of awe and professional reservation. The facility's entire approach to medical treatment was being rewritten, and he knew the implications would extend far beyond this single medical center. This technology, Dr. Lyra Knox said, her crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns of excitement, could revolutionize medical treatment across hundreds of star systems. But Marcus knew the challenges were far from over. Each breakthrough came with new questions, new complexities that needed to be understood. The medical team worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. A breakthrough came with the development of what Marcus called adaptive nanocommunication interfaces, microscopic devices that could facilitate communication between different biological systems. Unlike previous technological approaches that tried to impose a single standard of treatment, these interfaces were designed to be inherently adaptive. The research team developed prototype devices that could be customized for different species, creating personalized medical solutions that respected the unique characteristics of each biological system. Humanity's greatest strength, Marcus explained during a critical presentation, has always been our ability to adapt. We don't just solve problems, we reimagine what's possible. The presentation was attended by medical researchers from across 3 star systems. What had started as a last-ditch effort to save a failing medical facility was becoming something much larger, a potential revolution in interspecies medical treatment. But challenges remained. The medical establishment was deeply conservative, and many would resist these radical new approaches. Marcus knew that each breakthrough would be met with skepticism, with resistance from those who were comfortable with existing protocols. As the research session concluded, Dr. Lyra Knox approached Marcus. "You realize this is just the beginning, don't you?" Marcus smiled, a mix of determination and scientific excitement. "Of course. The most interesting discoveries are always the ones that raise more questions than they answer." Outside the research wing, the first patients treated with the new technologies were showing remarkable improvements. Beings who had been considered beyond help were now recovering, their unique biological systems finding a new balance. The human doctor had done more than just treat patients. He was rewriting the fundamental understanding of life itself. And this was only the beginning of what was possible. Cultural clash and understanding. The resistance came swiftly and decisively. As news of the revolutionary medical treatment spread across multiple star systems, a coalition of traditional medical administrators gathered to challenge Marcus Rodriguez's methods. The hearing took place in the Grand Medical Council chamber, a massive spherical room that seemed to float in space, with transparent walls showing the endless starscape beyond. Representatives from over 47 different species sat in tiered seating, their collective gaze fixed on the human doctor who stood alone at the center. Arch-Administrator Zornvex, a serpentine being whose body was a complex network of neural pathways, spoke first. Your methods are not just unconventional. They are a direct challenge to millennia of established medical research. Marcus stood calm, his hands clasped behind his back. Science progresses by challenging established understanding. Every breakthrough in medical history was once considered impossible. A holographic display materialized, showing the remarkable recovery rates of patients treated with the new methods. Patients who had been considered terminal were now not just surviving, but thriving. Species that had never shown the ability to recover from certain conditions were demonstrating unprecedented healing capabilities. Dr. Lyronox, who had become Marcus's strongest ally, stood to support him. Her crystalline form shifted with intensity as she spoke. These are not merely experimental results. These are lives saved. Entire biological systems restored. The challenge was more than medical, it was deeply cultural. Each species present had generations of medical tradition, complex belief systems about healing that went far beyond simple scientific methodology. Marcus represented something terrifying to many of them, the possibility that everything they knew might be fundamentally flawed. Your human arrogance, Zornvex continued, assumes that your brief evolutionary history gives you insight into medical treatments developed over millions of years. Marcus smiled, not a provocative smile, but one of genuine understanding. Adaptation is the most fundamental law of life. The moment we believe we know everything is the moment we stop learning. He began to tell stories. Not clinical reports, but narratives of individual patients. The gaseous being from Epsilon 9 who had been considered beyond help. The crystalline patient whose molecular structure was stabilizing. Real stories of real beings who had been given a second chance. The chamber grew quiet. Dr. Lyronox projected additional data, comparative studies showing how the new treatment protocols worked across different species. It wasn't about replacing existing knowledge, but about creating a more holistic understanding of biological systems. We're not destroying medical traditions, Marcus explained. We're expanding them. Every species has unique medical wisdom. Our approach is about finding the connections, the underlying principles that unite different biological systems. The hearing became a turning point. What had started as an inquisition began to transform into a dialogue. Representatives who had come to challenge Marcus now began to ask questions. Genuine, curious questions about how these new medical approaches worked. Krelvax, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Your method does something our medical systems have forgotten. You see patients as living beings, not just biological systems to be managed. It was more than a medical breakthrough. It was a philosophical revolution. As the hearing concluded, Marcus knew the battle was far from over. Changing established medical protocols would take time. Generations, perhaps. But the first step had been taken. The human doctor had shown that true healing was about more than technology. It was about understanding. About connection. About seeing the fundamental unity in all living systems. And in that moment, standing before representatives of countless species, Marcus Rodriguez represented something more than just a doctor. He represented hope. The critical intervention. The alarm systems of the Xyloxian Central Medical Facility erupted in a cacophony of sound and light that no single species could fully comprehend. Multiple biospatial warning indicators flashed simultaneously, a scenario that medical protocols had never anticipated. A massive hospital ship from the Quantum Drift Alliance had just arrived, carrying hundreds of patients from a recent catastrophic event. A stellar phenomenon had created a complex radiation exposure that was systematically breaking down cellular structures across multiple species. Traditional medical treatments were failing catastrophically. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the central diagnostic hub, his quantum-adaptive medical interface humming with intense activity. Dr. Lyra Knox materialized beside him, her crystalline form pulsing with urgent energy. "The radiation signature is unlike anything in our medical archives," she reported, her molecular structure flickering with concern. "Conventional treatments are causing more damage than healing." The incoming patients represented a nightmare scenario for interspecies medical treatment. Beings from at least 12 different biological classifications were experiencing cellular degradation at exponential rates. Where traditional medical approaches would have isolated and treated each species separately, likely resulting in massive casualties, Marcus saw something different. "It's not about treating individual species," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's about understanding the fundamental communication breakdown." His adaptive nanocommunication interfaces, developed during previous research, suddenly became more than just an experimental technology. They were now the only hope for hundreds of lives. Krelvax approached, his 4 eyes tracking the rapidly deteriorating patient data. "Our best physicians are recommending individual quarantine protocols. Estimated survival rate is less than 12%. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he was reconfiguring the entire medical facility's diagnostic systems. Where others saw individual patients, he saw an interconnected biological network, a complex system where communication was more important than individual treatment. "Prepare the quantum-adaptive containment chambers," he instructed. "And bring me the most advanced cross-species communication interfaces we've developed." The medical staff moved with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. Marcus's methods had proven successful before, but this was an entirely different scale of medical challenge. He began implementing a radical approach. Instead of treating each patient as a separate entity, he created a unified medical field that allowed for adaptive interspecies cellular communication. The nano-interfaces he had developed became conduits of healing, facilitating communication between biological systems that had previously been considered incompatible. Hours passed. The medical facility became a symphony of complex biological interactions. Where traditional methods would have created conflict, Marcus's approach created harmony. Dr. Lyra Knox watched in amazement as patients who should have been dying began to stabilize. The radiation-induced cellular breakdown wasn't being fought, it was being understood, redirected, transformed. "This is impossible," whispered one of the senior medical researchers. Marcus looked up, a mixture of concentration and profound understanding in his eyes. "Impossible is just a limitation of current understanding." As the critical hours passed, the survival rates began to climb. First to 20%, then 40%, then 65%. By the time the crisis peaked, over 80% of the patients had not just survived, but were showing signs of complete cellular recovery. The medical facility, once on the brink of failure, had become a beacon of hope. Marcus Rodriguez had done more than save lives. He had demonstrated a fundamental truth about life itself, that communication, adaptation, and understanding were the most powerful healing forces in the universe. Krelvax approached Marcus as the last of the critical patients stabilized. "You've changed everything," he said, his translator rendering his complex throat vibrations into simple words. Marcus smiled, a smile that spoke of scientific wonder and deep compassion. "We're just beginning to understand what's possible." Transformation and legacy. 5 solar cycles after the critical intervention, the Xyloxian Central Medical Facility had become something entirely new. What was once a struggling medical center was now a galactic hub of revolutionary medical research, with Dr. Marcus Rodriguez at its center. The facility had transformed from a traditional medical institution into a dynamic center of interspecies medical innovation. Research teams from hundreds of star systems now came to learn the new approach to medical treatment, an approach that had its roots in human adaptability and holistic thinking. Dr. Lyra, now the co-director of the facility, stood beside Marcus during a critical presentation to the Galactic Medical Council. Her crystalline form reflected the holographic displays showing the unprecedented medical breakthroughs achieved over the past 5 years. "We've not just changed medical treatment," Marcus explained to the assembled representatives. "We've changed how we understand life itself." The adaptive nanocommunication interfaces developed during his initial research had spawned entire new fields of medical science. Treatments that were once considered impossible were now routine. Species that had been isolated by their unique biological characteristics could now be treated with unprecedented effectiveness. But the impact went far beyond medical treatment. The approach Marcus had developed, of seeing systems as interconnected, of valuing communication and adaptation over rigid protocols, had begun to influence fields far beyond medicine. Diplomatic relations between species were improving. Economic systems were being reimagined. The very concept of interspecies cooperation was being transformed. Krell, who had once been Marcus's most skeptical administrator, now traveled the galaxy as an ambassador of the new medical philosophy. "We were so focused on our differences," he would say in his presentations, "that we forgot to look for our connections." During a quiet moment, as the facility prepared for another groundbreaking research symposium, Marcus reflected on the journey. Dr. Lyra approached, sensing his contemplative mood. "You changed everything," she said, her molecular structure shifting in a way that resembled a smile. Marcus chuckled. "No. We changed everything. Together." The facility had become more than a medical center. It was a symbol of what was possible when different perspectives came together. When curiosity overcame fear. When understanding replaced judgment. A new patient arrived, a being so unique in its biological composition that 5 years ago, it would have been considered untreatable. Now, it was just another opportunity to learn, to understand, to heal. As the sun of Karen 9 set outside, casting complex prismatic reflections through the facility's adaptive molecular windows, Marcus Rodriguez looked out at the stars. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. About the patients saved. About the barriers broken. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt, to see connections where others saw only differences. And here, in this medical facility at the edge of known space, that strength had found its most profound expression. The human doctor had not just saved a medical facility. He had shown the universe a new way of understanding life itself. And this was only the beginning.